These are long, deep things you think about for years. I'm just trying to pull them up and remember them as we're going along. But when we see that, the vision and the dream, we usually go for, and the reality check is outside of that. But for those 21 years, reality was more strong than the vision or dream, was closer. Of course, in that time, that was the beginning of home computers, right up to the building up the internet and the World Wide Web, and then all the spy and the government controls and all the digital controls around us. Wow, changed the world. And it brought in new functions, but a lot of new fears during this time period. So that's a phase. That's not an aspect, but it happens in history. But when Pluto's going through Scorpio, Pluto goes through Scorpio in about 13 years. It doesn't take very long to go through Scorpio. It takes about 12. What did it take? 1 second. I used to have these numbers solidly in my mind, but it's let's just see. Pluto went into Scorpio 84. Okay, so Scorpio, it went into Sag in 95. So that was 12 years. So Pluto spent 12 years in Scorpio, because at the beginning and end, it goes in, goes out like that. So it's, you know, that extra year. But when it went through Taurus, a long time ago, 100 years ago or more, it spent 38 years in Taurus. So you could argue a confrontation with Scorpio can be really intense, but you get it over with in 12 years. A Taurus, it takes you 38 years to go through it all. So there's different timings, different pressures, different. So the aspects will of course be longer when it's in Taurus, and when it's we're only going to get. We start with a conjunction, and maybe it goes back and forth a bit, but we're only going to get one, at most two aspects of Pluto to any planet or any angles in our chart in a lifetime. And if you're doing charts of in history and you're going back to last century and you're watching people go up, and or people that were born and they had to live through the Pluto and Taurus, that was a long, slow 38-year process. And the individual degree aspects probably would last more like 3 years than 2. So but when someone was born in the 80s, or someone was born like at the end of the last war, say 46 up to the 70s, they would have like in Scorpio, just 12 years. But so depending, you know how we said Saturn gets its opposition at 44, 45, Uranus squares at 38, 39, 40 in that period, and that's the beginning of the midlife crisis. Neptune comes in there and squares itself at 42. These three together are our midlife crises. Well, Pluto, when it makes it square, it can happen anyway. It can happen to different people at different times, from 39 years old, the earliest. So that would have been people born just in the Great Depression. But people born during the war and in the 40s and 50s probably would have it in their 40s. But some people wouldn't get their first square of Pluto to itself till they're in their 90s. It can go up to 91. So that's huge. So one person gets one generation in one century will get Pluto will come in, and they'll have to grow up and deal with this reality check and realize, do this confrontational assessment of who I am, what I'm doing at 39 in the midlife crisis. Someone else might have it in 91 or 90 or at 80 or at 70. Pluto adds this confrontation. What's really true? I'm afraid. What's what I have to deal with? Things are going to come up you have to deal with. Well, Pluto's there. So the one aspect that lasts is a year or two, but it's and that since you have that and you have the moon, the sun, the Mercury, Venus, you have all the planets and the angles, you got about 13 or 14 years where confrontations are going to come out. And probably out of that, maybe 8 or 9 really critical years. And that will be in your life that really challenge your destiny, challenge what you're capable of doing. So I'm going to use my own example here. Let's just take Pluto to Pluto. So I'll put it here. I'm going to put Pluto here, put Pluto over here. So my way, and we can see the screen better. Okay. Okay, so there's the. So really, we're accumulating experiences, the first portion of that. By the time we get to the Pluto square, we're judging all that stuff, what's true, what's not. Well, everyone goes through it about the same time. Your generation will go through it about within the same year or two, or the same couple of years, but it'll be unique to each person. It'll be in different houses, it'll be making different aspects, depends on its setup. But as soon as it comes up to square itself, any conjunctions and squares it had in your natal chart are going to be triggered at that same time as it's squaring itself. Now for me, here's my Pluto to Pluto, 1 second. There we go. Pluto. For me, I had Pluto, it went retrograde, came back, and then it sort of went forward when retrograde came back. So part of that at the beginning was my trouble with the formula, but then really the second hit was my brother was born, or my mom got pregnant, and the third hit was my brother was born, my mom's mom died a month later, a month or two later, her father died, and a few months later, her grandfather died, all in the same year. Well, that's their charts, but this was happening around me and bringing up a fearful or harsh beginning. Okay, so that's just, you have to look at these times. I don't, as much as you can get history on those early days. But really it came in 1988 for me. Hit in 88 into 89. It hit January to March of 88, October to December of 88, and April to October of 89. So when we do our bio or rebirthing, we don't remember things kind of different. I had built a musical instrument, and I built it in late 70s, in the 79, and I built the celestial harp, and I had the strings I was working with, challenging. I never recorded it. I was trying to play it. I was trying to learn how to play it, trying to do things with it. It was like a mentor bugging me for 10 years. I was never good enough. What could I do? In 1988, I did my first recording on it. It wasn't a great recording, but I forced myself to have to pull a few people and get the recording equipment in, do something. But it's funny, it was a fear that I was afraid of doing, but I had to get over it. I wasn't the musician, but I had to get over it because I built it. I couldn't let it just sit there. I had to do something with it. There was a Pluto reality around it. And shortly after that, I got my third marriage began. So at the beginning of this, my marriage had ended. And at the end of this, by the second hit, my third marriage came, and I went on a book tour across the country. So even though I was married, I went on a book tour across the country, and that wasn't with my wife. So it was it had its own fears and challenging around that. And that came as I published an almanac. In 1990 and 1991, I published these. They were astrology almanacs, but they were a little more technical, a little more built up than most almanacs. And it took me on some tours across the country to follow it up, to bookstores, to reading. But even in doing the books, like, it was a great thing. It was a good thing for me. It was really high profile doing that. It was the old world with the book publisher publishing a book, and you have to go with it. Wasn't the internet. There wasn't any internet then. But there was a confrontation in this too, because the publishers wanted to support the bookstore. So they had me go around to do talk shows on the radio and talk about it, and do signings at the bookstore, so it would bring people in to buy the books in the store for that one day. But they wouldn't let me put my address in and sell it myself. So even though they put it out, I couldn't. If I'd have put my post office box number, they sent an order in, I probably would have sold 4,000 or 5,000 of them. In the end, they sold a couple of thousand of them. But the mechanics of how they're doing it was really different. And there was nothing I do against the system. Even though I knew it was wrong, I tried to get advice. I was up against a structure that wasn't there. So even though these were successful things, there were really big confrontations behind it. And in the end, after 2 years, the almanac ended because they weren't getting enough sales because they weren't selling it properly. And it was selling expensive. It was like a $25 book. It wasn't a $5 almanac. So there was good and bad, but it was challenging. And I had to do, over that year, to write the almanacs and stuff, I had to do like a lot of lonely hours writing and calculating and doing things and getting it all prepared. So this was my Pluto, squaring Pluto. That's not the most intense aspect of Pluto. That was just the reality check. I couldn't stay where I got the harp. I had to play it. I had this knowledge. I had to do it. I didn't want to be alone. I had to get married. So like these things all came up at that time. Okay. So now out of the transits as you're going along, you're going to have your own stories. You're going to see it. I saw the things and I didn't immediately see, oh, that's Pluto. But then when I thought of the energy around it, I said, oh yeah, there were a lot of fears I had to face inside of that and confrontations around that. And at the very end, at the end of it all, the almanac wasn't worth doing because they didn't have the marketing. They didn't clue into the new way of marketing as the world was changing. So, okay. It can come in many, many different. The Pluto itself, it comes to you just watch it and you see how you have to see how it shows. You can't know exactly it's this or that, but that it is, you know. When Pluto hits the personal planets in your chart, your Moon, your Mercury, your Venus, your Sun, your Mars, these are dramatically challenging. And even Jupiter and Saturn, it's pretty dramatic. You can see these effects quite strongly. It's distinctly recognizable. But before it's happening, you're not going to build up someone's fears and saying, oh, you're going to get more afraid. But you could say, you're going to have to, if someone's drinking too much, you're going to have to get straight, or you could get sick, or there's going to be some confrontation that comes up around that. You can see it coming. And usually if you're truthful and you're working hard, just because something goes wrong doesn't mean you sell out. You still hold on. So, but if you sell it, then if you surrender to bad people instead of standing up to them, bad people increase in your life. So this is, you'll see fear. So if we're going to, let's just go here. Sorry, take Pluto. We'll do Pluto to the Sun. Our goals and purpose. Now, if you have a planet square Pluto, you're going to have two of these sitting at the same time. But if we take Pluto to the Sun, sorry. Okay, so we just got